I watched someone making $320,000 a year completely implode financially in 6 months. This wasn't some gambling addict or financial illiterate. This was a senior software engineer at a major tech company, stock options, benefits package, the works. He drove a $75,000 BMW, lived in a house with a $4,500 monthly mortgage. Every year, his family did these elaborate 2-week European vacations that probably cost $15,000 each. On paper, absolutely crushing life. Then the layoff email arrived. He got 10-week severance and had exactly $1,800 in his checking account. Within 4 months, he was raiding his 400 wunk to make the mortgage. By month 7, he was taking contract gigs at $85 an hour, less than half his previous rate. Because he literally couldn't afford to wait for the right opportunity. Here is what nobody tells you about that story. The layoff didn't destroy him. The layoff just revealed what was already true. He'd built a financial structure that required every single dollar he earned, every single month, with zero room for disruption. The minute his income stopped, the entire thing collapsed like a house of cards. And that is what your 40s are actually about. Not whether you'll get rich, whether you'll be calm. I am Leo, and I've spent years studying how actual wealth gets built, not the Instagram version, the real version. And what I've learned is that most people walk right through their 40s, making decisions that will determine the next 30 years of their lives, without even realizing those decisions are permanent. Let me explain what I mean. In your 20s and 30s, you have this invisible safety net called time. You can make bad financial decisions and recover, because compound interest and career momentum are still working in your favor. You've got decades to course correct. But in your 40s, the math fundamentally changes. Not because it is too late, it absolutely isn't. But because every decision you make now gets multiplied forward into your 50s and 60s with way less time to fix mistakes. You are standing at a fork in the road. One path leads to a future where you have options. The other leads to a future where you have obligations. And here is the insane part. The difference between these two paths usually has nothing to do with how much you earn. It is about something most people never even measure. I call it margin. Think of your financial life as 2 buckets. One bucket is your income, what flows in every month. The other bucket is your fixed costs. What has to flow out every month just to keep the lights on, the space between those 2 buckets. That is your margin, and margin is the single most valuable asset you can have in your 40s. Not your home equity, not your 400 wunk balance, not your car, margin. Because margin is what gives you options. It is what lets you say no to soul-crushing work, and yes to opportunities that actually grow you. It is what keeps your brain out of constant survival mode, so you can think strategically instead of just firefighting every crisis. Now, here is the first thing that makes your 40s different from every other decade. The decisions you make about fixed costs aren't temporary anymore. They're structural. When you are 28, and you finance a car with a 5-year loan, okay? You'll pay it off by 33 and reset. But when you are 44 and you take out a 30-year mortgage at the absolute top of what you can afford, you just locked in that payment until you are 74. You didn't just commit next year's cash flow, you committed the next 3 decades. And that single decision will determine whether you enter your 60s with breathing room or with your back permanently against the wall. Let me give you a real example. There is this couple I know, both mid-40s, both working professional jobs. They had a house they bought back in 2013 for $380,000, modest place, fine neighborhood. Payment was around $1,900 monthly, including taxes and insurance. Then in 2021, with interest rates near zero and home prices absolutely exploding, they did what every real estate agent and financial expert told them was smart. They sold that house for $620,000 and upgraded, bought a place for $900,000. Suddenly, their payment went from $1,900 to $4,400 per month. Same couple, same jobs, same income. But now, 52% of their take-home pay was going to housing before they'd bought a single grocery or paid any other bill. And here is the devastating part. They didn't feel richer, they felt trapped, because every single month, that $4,400 had to go out the door before anything else could happen. Building an emergency fund. Can't afford it. Extra retirement contributions. Not this year. Career flexibility. Forget about it. They couldn't afford to take a pay cut for a better OP Opportunity because the house required both incomes at their current levels just to stay afloat. They traded a small amount of additional living space for an enormous amount of financial stress. And that stress doesn't show up on Instagram. It shows up at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep because you are doing worst case scenario math in your head. This is where it gets really interesting. The Federal Reserve does this survey every year asking Americans about their financial well-being. About half say they're living paycheck to paycheck. You might think, okay, that is low-income households struggling. But Bank of America analyzed their own customer data and found something shocking, even high. Income households report this exact same feeling, people making six figures saying they have no margin, no breathing room. And the reason is brutally simple: lifestyle creep. You get a raise and within 6 months, your fixed costs have risen to match it. Your car gets nicer, your house gets bigger, your subscriptions multiply. Suddenly, you are making more money than ever, but feeling more financially stuck than ever. Let me put actual numbers on this. According to Experian, the average new car payment in America right now is about $780 per month. If you are financing used, it is around $560. Most households have 2 cars. So let's say you are paying $1,500 monthly just in car payments over 6 years. That is over $108,000 in total payments. Now imagine instead of those 2 financed cars, you bought reliable used vehicles outright for maybe $28,000 total. Suddenly, you've got that $1,500 per month back. If you invested that difference at a conservative 7% real return, in just 10 years you'd have over $260,000. That is one decision, just cars. And it completely changes the trajectory of your entire decade. Here is what people fundamentally misunderstand. Stress isn't caused by not having enough money. It is caused by exposure, by having too little buffer between you and the next financial disruption. And in your 40s, you are at peak exposure. You've got kids in expensive activities. You've got aging parents who might need financial help. You've got a mortgage. You've got career pressure. You've got college costs looming on the horizon. If you've built a life where your fixed costs consume 75 to 85% of your income, you are one bad month away from a crisis. And your brain knows it. Even if you are not consciously stressed, your nervous system is running hot all the time, scanning for threats, waiting for the other shoe to drop. There is this concept in behavioral economics called scarcity mindset. Researchers discovered that when people feel like they don't have enough, whether it is money, time, or anything else, their brains literally start operating differently. They develop what is called tunneling. This intense focus on immediate problems that actually makes it harder to think about long-term strategy. It is like your cognitive bandwidth gets consumed by the stress, leaving fewer mental resources for everything else. And here is what is wild. This effect isn't just about being objectively poor. It is about the feeling of scarcity, which means someone making $140,000 a year, but spending $135,000 experiences the exact same cognitive narrowing as someone making $35,000. The brain doesn't care about absolute numbers. It cares about the gap, about margin. Think about what this does to your decision making. When you are in scarcity mode, you make worse choices. You take the first job offer instead of negotiating for more. You avoid necessary but uncomfortable conversations with your boss because you can't risk any disruption to your income stream. You stay in situations that are slowly destroying you because you literally can't afford the short-term chaos of making a change. This is the paradox of high income without margin. You make more money, but you have less freedom. Because freedom isn't about how much you earn. It is about how much you keep and how little you are obligated to spend every month just to maintain your current life. Now you might be thinking, okay, Leo, but I have responsibilities. I've got kids. I can't just drive a 20-year-old beater and live in a tiny apartment. And look, I am not saying you should. What I am saying is that the 40-something version of you needs to ask a fundamentally different question than the 30-something version did. The question isn't, what can I afford? The question is, what does this decision cost me in terms of future options? Every time you increase your fixed costs, you are trading future flexibility for current consumption. And in your 40s, that trade has permanent consequences. Let me give you another story. I know someone who at 46 was making about $95,000 annually. Not spectacular by coastal city standards, but solid. He drove a 12-year-old Camry. He lived in a neighborhood that was perfectly fine but not trendy. His mortgage was $1,350 monthly, and because his fixed costs were so low relative to his income, he was saving almost 28% of his take-home pay by age 51. He had built up enough margin that when his company started going in a direction he fundamentally disagreed with, he could just walk away, took 7 months off, retrained in a completely different field, came back at 52 making less than before, but infinitely happier, and he could afford to do that because his life didn't require $95,000 a year to function. It required maybe $60,000. That gap between what he earned and what he needed, that was freedom. That was the margin that let him make a decision based on what he wanted instead of what he was financially trapped into. Now compare that to someone making $180,000 but spending all of it. That person has income, but they don't have leverage, they don't have options, they're a high-paid prisoner. And the thing is, most of the spending that creates that prison isn't even making them happier. It is just what everyone else appears to be doing. It is the comparison game. And if you are still playing that game in your 40s, you are going to lose, because the finish line keeps moving and the cost of playing keeps going up. Here is another pattern I've noticed. The people who feel most calm and secure in their 50s aren't the ones who made the most money in their 40s. They're the ones who built the most margin. Because margin is what converts money from just a number on a screen into actual life options. With margin, you can take a calculated career risk. You can say no to a client or boss who treats you terribly. You can help your kids financially without wrecking your own retirement. You can handle an unexpected $8,000 emergency without spiraling into debt. Margin is psychological oxygen, and most people in their 40s are suffocating themselves with fixed costs and calling it success. Let me show you what this looks like in practice with real numbers. Let's say you are 44 years old making $125,000 annually. After taxes, you are taking home about $87,000. If your fixed costs, mortgage, cars, insurance, utilities, subscriptions, all the stuff you can't easily cut, if that is consuming $63,000, you've got $24,000 left for everything else. That is $2,000 monthly for groceries, gas, clothes, entertainment, unexpected expenses, and trying to save something. It is tight. You are constantly making trade-offs. One bad month and you are behind. Now imagine you made that same $125,000, but your fixed costs were only $43,000. Suddenly, you've got $44,000 in discretionary space. That is $3,700 per month. You can save aggressively. You can invest. You can absorb a surprise expense without stress. You can make career moves based on growth potential instead of desperation. Same income, completely different life. The difference is the decisions you made about housing and cars 3 years ago. This brings me to the retirement problem that nobody wants to talk about, honestly. Vanguard publishes data every year on retirement account balances. The median 401 balance for people in their 40s is around $160,000. Now, some people have way more and some have way less, but that is the middle. And when you ask Americans what they think they need to retire comfortably, the typical answer is somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million. So there is a gap, a massive one, and here is the uncomfortable question: what closes that gap? It is not stock picking genius. It is not crypto moonshots. It is not real estate speculation. What closes that gap is boring compound interest mathematics, combined with two things: time and consistent contributions. And in your 40s, you are running out of one of those variables. You still have time, but not infinite time, which means the contribution variable becomes exponentially more important. And the only way to increase contributions is to increase the gap between what you earn and what you are obligated to spend. Let me show you the math. If you are 43 years old with $160,000 saved and you want to hit $1.3 million by age 67, you need to contribute roughly $1,350 monthly, assuming a 7% real return after inflation. That is $16,200 per year. If you are currently saving 6% of an $87,000 take-home, that is about $5,200 annually or $433 per month. To get to $1,350 monthly, you need to find an extra $917 every single month. Where does that come from? Either you dramatically increase your income, which is hard to control, or you dramatically decrease your fixed costs, which is entirely within your control. Here is where people make a catastrophic mistake. They hit some savings milestone. Let's say they get their investment accounts to $75,000, and they celebrate by buying something big, a boat, a vacation property, a luxury car, some reward for their discipline. And I get it. You worked hard, you want to enjoy the fruits of that labor. But here is what you actually just did. You converted an asset that was working for you into a liability that works against you. That $75,000, if left alone and continuing to compound, would grow into serious wealth. But if you pull it out or stop contributing to buy the thing, you reset the compounding clock. And in your 40s, you don't have time for resets. I was at a dinner party once where this guy, mid-40s, clearly proud, announced he just bought a boat for $45,000. He said he deserved it after years of grinding. And everyone nodded approvingly, but I did the math in my head. $45,000 invested at 7% for 20 years is approximately $174,000. He didn't buy a boat for $45,000. He sold $174,000 of his future to rent a boat for maybe a decade. Now maybe that trade is worth it to him. I am not here to judge anyone's priorities, but I don't think he thought about it that way. I think he thought he was spending $45,000. He wasn't. He was spending the entire future value of that capital. That is the invisible cost. Nobody calculates the shadow price of every purchase. Let me tell you what actually happens to people who get this right. They enter their 50s with options. They're not necessarily rich, but they're calm. They don't flinch when the car needs a $1,200 repair. They don't panic when their industry starts shifting. They can afford to take a lower-paying job if it offers dramatically better quality of life, because their lifestyle doesn't require maximum income to function. They can help their kids financially without destroying their own retirement plans. They sleep better. They make better decisions because they're not operating from constant scarcity mindset. And ironically, that calmness often leads to better career outcomes anyway because they negotiate from strength instead of fear. It is a positive feedback loop. Margin creates confidence. Confidence creates better decisions. Better decisions create more margin. So, what do you actually do with this information? Let me give you 3 things that matter more than anything else in your 40s. First, know your fixed cost percentage. Add up everything you absolutely have to pay every month. Mortgage, car payments, insurance, utilities, subscriptions. You can't easily cancel. Minimum debt payments, everything. Divide that by your monthly take, home income. If that number is over 55%, you are in the danger zone. Every percentage point you can reduce that number is a percentage point of options you are buying back. Second, stop financing depreciating assets. If something loses value over time and you are paying interest on it, you are getting destroyed from both directions simultaneously. The asset loses value every year and you are paying the bank for the privilege of losing money. Buy cars used, buy with cash if at all possible. Drive them until the wheels fall off. This one decision can free up thousands of dollars annually that can go toward actually building wealth instead of servicing debt on things that become worthless. Third, build 6 months of living expenses in cash before you do anything else. I know it sounds boring. I know index funds historically have better returns. But the psychological return on an emergency fund is infinite. It is the difference between operating from scarcity and operating from abundance. And once you have it, protect it religiously. Don't use it for vacations. Don't use it to buy things. It exists for one purpose, to keep your brain out of panic mode so you can think clearly when disruption inevitably arrives. Here is what nobody tells you. The game in your 40s isn't about getting rich. It is about reducing your fragility. Every financial decision you make should be evaluated through one single lens. Does this make me more resilient or more exposed? Does this increase my optionality or decrease it? A bigger house might feel like success, but if it requires both incomes at maximum capacity just to stay current, it is actually increasing your fragility, your exposure to disruption. A nicer car might feel like you've made it, but if it comes with an 8-year loan, that is 8 years of reduced ability to pivot when opportunity or crisis shows up. I've spent significant time around people who built actual lasting wealth, not lottery winners, not inheritance recipients, but people who built it through decades of smart decisions and compounding. And here is what is consistent among all of them. They maintain low fixed costs relative to their income. Not because they're cheap, but because they understood early that margin is more valuable than appearance. They'd rather have options than status symbols. They'd rather sleep well than drive well. And by their 50s and 60s, that choice has compounded into a completely different quality of life. Look, I understand that changing course in your 40s is hard. You've got commitments, you've got kids in schools, you've got a career that is maybe finally hitting its stride after years of grinding. You've got a life built around certain assumptions and expectations. But here's the reality. If you don't make deliberate changes now, your 50s will make those changes for you. And it is dramatically less pleasant when circumstances force your hand than when you choose your path deliberately. The fork in the road is right in front of you. One path leads to a future where you are calm, where you have options, where disruption is manageable. The other leads to a future where you are stressed, where you are trapped, where every unexpected event creates a crisis. And the difference between these paths is almost entirely about the decisions you make right now in your 40s. About your monthly overhead. Your 40s aren't the end of the story. They're not even the climax. They're the chapter where you decide what kind of ending you are building toward. And most people sleepwalk through this chapter, following the script everyone else follows: bigger house, nicer cars, more stuff, more obligations, less margin. But that script was written by people trying to sell you things, not by people trying to make your life better. So maybe it is time to write your own script. One where margin matters more than appearances, where optionality matters more than status, where the goal isn't to look successful to your neighbors. It is to actually be free. If this changed how you think about your 40s and what actually matters financially, hit that subscribe button. I break down the psychology and mathematics of real wealth building every week. Let's figure out how to build lives with actual options instead of just impressive-looking obligations. I am not a financial advisor, mortgage expert, or licensed financial professional. The content on this channel represents personal opinions only and is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. Please conduct your own research and seek professional guidance before making any major financial decisions. See you next time.